She walked into the room like she didn't belong, and that's exactly how they wanted her to feel. Every stare was a dagger, every whisper a reminder, "You're not one of us." They were dressed in tailored suits and couture gowns, sipping vintage wine like it was tap water, circling million-dollar art like vultures. But when she stepped inside, the chatter didn't just pause. It spiked. Phones out. Eyes rolled. Snickers exchanged. One man in a navy tux said loud enough for her to hear, "She must be lost." Another woman clutched her pearls literally and smirked, "Security will sort it out." But she didn't flinch. Her heels clicked like war drums against the marble floor as she crossed the room with purpose, scanning the art, the crowd, and then the stage. The painting, a centuries-old masterpiece, stood bathed in gold light, the centerpiece of the auction. Estimated value? $300 million. Rumors swirled it would break every record. The room was a battlefield of egos, power, and old money. And in their eyes, she wasn't even a foot soldier, just background noise. No one knew her name. No one asked. They assumed that she was staff, or maybe some +1 mistake. What they didn't know was that she wasn't here to watch. She was here to own. And when she pulled out her phone, that's when the humiliation began. The moment she raised her phone, a man in a bow tie snapped his fingers at her like she was a waiter. "We'll have another bottle over here," he barked, laughing before even finishing the sentence. Two women beside him burst into giggles, clearly enjoying the show. One leaned in and whispered, "She really thinks she can just stand there?" But she wasn't serving drinks. She was wiring money. Quietly, calmly. Security didn't get it either. Within minutes, two men in black suits approached her, all firm smiles and fake concern. "Ma'am, guests aren't allowed to be on their phones during the auction," one said. "If you're lost, we're happy to escort you." The crowd smirked, watching it unfold like theater. Even the auctioneer paused, waiting for the disruption to end. But she didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She calmly asked for the Wi-Fi password. That alone made one of the guards raise an eyebrow, as if it was the most absurd request of the night. But when they hesitated, she repeated herself. "I suggest you give me the Wi-Fi. Now." Her voice was low, controlled, but ice cold, the kind of tone that doesn't ask, it commands. Still, the room didn't see power. They saw audacity. One man scoffed, "This is exactly what happens when you open the doors to everyone." And then the auctioneer raised the gavel. It was time to bid. The auctioneer's voice rang out like a starter pistol. "Opening bid, 100 million. Instantly, paddles flew up. A silver-haired man in the front row raised his, barely looking at the painting. 120. A woman in emerald green leaned forward. 150. The numbers jumped like heartbeats. 170, 190, 200. It was war. She stood still. No paddle, no gestures, just watching, just waiting. By 250 million, things were getting vicious. Bidders exchanged glares sharper than the diamonds on their wrists. People whispered names, oil tycoons, tech moguls, generational heirs, trying to guess who would win. No one guessed her. Not once. And then it happened. The same man who had snapped his fingers at her turned sneering. "Oh no, don't tell me she's bidding now." He was laughing. Loudly. The whole table joined in. "Maybe she found it on Amazon," another joked. Laughter echoed. She didn't respond, just looked at her phone, her expression unreadable, calm, icy. And then, as the auctioneer announced, 290 going once, she lifted one hand. No paddle, just a single deliberate gesture. And in the silence that followed, she spoke just 4 words. 300 million. Wire transfer. The room froze. But the mockery hadn't ended. It was only about to get uglier. For a full second, no one said a word. The room had been roaring just moments earlier, and now it was silent. The kind of silence that buzzes with disbelief. Then, a scoff cut through the air like a blade. "That's not how this works," someone muttered. A man 3 rows back rolled his eyes. "She's bluffing," he said with a smirk. "Probably thinks this is eBay." The auctioneer hesitated, visibly unsure. Uh, Apologies, miss, but bids must be placed with a registered paddle. I own paddle 42, she interrupted. Your staff verified it before I walked in. My bank is on the line right now. The room cracked again, this time with outrage. She's lying, barked the woman in emerald. There's no way she's vetted. Another bidder stood up and actually shouted. This is a serious auction, not a PR stunt. The whispers turned to open hostility. Must be laundering, someone hissed. Or some diversity stunt. Security started moving again. A new man approached, taller, clearly in charge. He leaned in and quietly asked for proof of funds. Her only response was to tilt the phone toward him, and on screen, the 6 words that made his jaw clench. Wire transfer in progress. 500-0-0. The man stepped back, silent, shaken. And that's when the crowd really lost it. A woman in the 3rd row stood up and shouted, "This is absurd. I want to see her credentials." Another waved down the auctioneer, yelling, "You're seriously entertaining this?" And the auctioneer, visibly sweating now, tried to maintain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, we will verify all legitimate bids." But it was no use. The room had turned into a courtroom, and she was on trial. Not for fraud, for existing in their world. A black woman, in a designer suit they didn't recognize, placing a $500 million bid without blinking. It broke their brains. They started circling her like sharks, not physically, but with words. What's your company? What's your net worth? Who invited you? You don't look like a collector. One man even had the gall to ask, is your husband the real buyer? Still, she said nothing. Just checked the time on her watch. Her calmness enraged them more than anything else. Because in their world, people like her were supposed to shrink under pressure. Apologize. Explain. Leave. But then, something happened that made the energy shift. The tall security chief who had seen her phone? He walked back toward the auctioneer and whispered something in his ear. The auctioneer blinked, nodded, adjusted his tie, and then he raised the gavel again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice trembling, "we have a verified wire transfer in motion." That's when the panic really began. Panic wears many faces, and in that room, it looked like desperation wrapped in pearls and cufflinks. The bidders, once smug and smiling, suddenly scrambled to recover control. 400 million, one shouted, breathless. 450, another blurted out, eyes darting. But the auctioneer didn't acknowledge them. Bidding is closed, he said flatly. Funds have already been initiated. Gasps swept through the room like a windstorm. One man slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do that," he roared. "I demand a revote, or a rebid, or whatever the hell this is." But they all knew the truth. The rules hadn't changed. They'd just been forced to follow them. For once, someone outside their inner circle had beat them at their own game, and it stung like hell. One woman stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots, muttering something about lawsuits. Another tried to sweet-talk the auctioneer. "Let's be reasonable. There must be a way to correct this." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She's embarrassing the institution." And through it all, the woman, the only woman not unraveling, simply stood tall, unreadable, her hands clasped behind her back. Then the final dagger. The auctioneer picked up the microphone, cleared his throat, and said, "The winning bidder is Miss Rain Dupree, CEO of Sovereign Equity Group." And the silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was stunned surrender. Rain Dupree. The name landed like thunder, but few recognized it. Not yet. But within seconds, people were already typing it into their phones, fingers trembling, faces tightening as they read. Headlines, articles, features. Youngest black woman to manage a 50 billion portfolio. Bought out 2 hedge funds in a single quarter. Quietly owns real estate in 5 countries. Suddenly, the room remembered how to whisper, but now it was fear, not arrogance in their voices. "She's that Rain? Why didn't we know she was coming? Who invited her?" The truth was, no one had. She didn't need an invitation. She bought her seat. One man who had openly mocked her just minutes earlier walked up, pretending he hadn't. "Miss Dupree," he said, forcing a smile, "we should talk about—" "I'm not here to talk," she cut in. "I came for the painting." Another bidder tried flattery. "Incredible move. You really caught us off guard." She looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't come here to surprise you. I came to be seen." And now, finally, they saw her. Not as a guest, not as a mistake, as a threat, as someone who shattered their illusion of control with calm, class, and a wire transfer. But she wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the painting wasn't just a prize, it was a message. The painting, an ancient work from the 17th century, had been passed through royal families and private vaults for centuries. But what most didn't know, what Rain did, was its dark history. It had once been looted from a kingdom in West Africa during colonial raids, ripped from its homeland by force, and traded like a trophy among European elites. For decades, the truth had been buried under provenance reports and sanitized museum labels, until Rain's team traced it back. Quietly, carefully, relentlessly. She didn't just come to win, she came to reclaim. And now, standing before the painting, she finally spoke to the room, not loud, but crystal clear. "This piece was stolen from my ancestors, from my history, today. I'm taking it back." The crowd went rigid. They weren't just watching a financial flex anymore. They were watching a reckoning. One man muttered, "This isn't about art anymore." She turned to face him. It never was. The press started snapping photos. Her name hit trending lists. Outside the venue, a crowd had already begun to gather. Word had spread like wildfire. Inside, the billionaires sat frozen, exposed by a truth money couldn't spin, that the very foundation of their legacy was built on what people like Rain had been denied. And just when it felt like the moment had peaked, she reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. She unfolded the letter slowly, deliberately, the way someone pulls back the final curtain before the lights go out. "This," she said, "is a transfer of ownership, not just of the painting, but of its future." The crowd leaned in, unsure whether to scoff or stay silent. Rain looked out across the room, all those eyes that once belittled her, and continued. "Effective immediately, this piece will be returned to the descendants of the royal family it was stolen from. It's going home." Gasps broke out. Audible. Real. One of the art dealers sputtered, "You're giving it away?" Another said, "You paid $500 million to donate it?" Rain smiled for the first time that night. "You thought this was about ownership. It was always about justice." And then she turned the final knife. But if any of you are interested in purchasing artwork with an ethical history, Sovereign Equity Group is launching a Black-owned fine art fund next quarter. You'll need to apply. The silence that followed wasn't stunned anymore. It was crushed. She walked off the stage, leaving behind the gasps, the ruined egos, and the shattered illusions of supremacy. But just as she reached the doors, one of the same security guards who had tried to escort her out leaned in. He whispered, "They'll never forget this." And she replied, without looking back, "That was the point." Outside, the air was electric. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but Rain didn't stop. She walked straight to the waiting car, flanked by her team, calm, precise, unstoppable. But across the city, across the world, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Black woman outsmarts billionaire elites in historic art power move. Rain Dupree breaks auction record, then returns stolen painting to Africa. Inside the auction house, the mood was radioactive. The elites weren't just angry, they were exposed. Every insult, every whisper, every smug glance had been witnessed, recorded, immortalized. The internet was eating them alive. And in quiet corners of the art world, the ripple effects had already started. Museums started pulling pieces for review. Collectors began questioning provenance. Auction houses scrambled to avoid the same fate. Rain hadn't just claimed victory. She cracked open the doors they'd sealed shut for centuries. She didn't just make history, she rewrote it. And for every little black girl who would one day walk into a room like that, head high, purpose burning, they'd remember this moment. They'd remember her name. Not as an exception, but as a standard. because she didn't ask for a seat at the table. She bought the table, burned the contract, and built her own kingdom. If that moment gave you chills, hit subscribe. We tell the stories they never thought we'd live to tell.